A waitress's necklace connects her to a billionaire's lost daughter. What begins as a chance encounter unravels dark family secrets. Eleanor Blackwood, desperate for answers, discovers betrayal, lies, and a son willing to destroy everything to protect the family's fortune. As the truth comes to light, Emma and Eleanor must face a past more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. Will they expose the truth, or will it be buried forever? The cafe buzzed with the usual hum of clinking cups, low chatter, and the soft hiss of the espresso machine. It was a place where the city's elite came to unwind, and Emma had become quite familiar with the rhythm of it all. She moved between tables with grace, her apron tied neatly around her waist, her long dark hair tucked behind her ears as she balanced a tray of lattes. She was a woman of few words, always polite but never lingering longer than necessary. But today, as she approached the corner booth where Eleanor Blackwood sat, a chill seemed to wash over her. Eleanor, a woman whose name was synonymous with power and wealth, sat in her usual seat by the window, her sharp eyes hidden behind gold-rimmed glasses. Despite her age, she still carried an aura of unapproachable authority. As Emma placed the coffee in front of Eleanor, their eyes met. Eleanor's gaze flickered for a moment, then settled on Emma's neck. The old woman's sharp intake of breath was barely audible, but it didn't go unnoticed. Her eyes widened as she stared at the emerald necklace Emma wore, her fingers tightening around the edge of her cup. "Where did you get that necklace?" Eleanor's voice cracked as she spoke, her eyes not leaving the piece of jewelry that hung around Emma's neck. Emma hesitated for a moment, surprised by the intensity of the question. "It was my mother's," she replied, her fingers instinctively touching the delicate emerald pendant. "She passed away years ago." Eleanor's expression softened for a moment, but it quickly turned to one of confusion. "It can't be," she whispered, barely audible. "That necklace, it belonged to my daughter." Emma blinked in surprise, her heart skipping a beat. She had never mentioned her mother's past to anyone, especially not to someone like Eleanor Blackwood. Yet, something about the older woman's voice stirred a deep unease within her. Eleanor leaned forward, her hand trembling as it reached out toward Emma's neck. "It's identical to the one I gave her before she disappeared. My daughter, she vanished decades ago." For a moment, Emma stood frozen, caught in the intensity of Eleanor's gaze. Her mind raced, but no words came. Was this some kind of coincidence, or was it something more? "I'm sorry, but I don't understand," Emma managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "My mother died in a car accident when I was just a child." "There's no way she could have," Eleanor interrupted, her voice rising with emotion. "No, that's not possible. My daughter. She was forced to leave. She never told me where she was going, but she took that necklace with her. It was the last gift I gave her before she disappeared." The mention of the necklace seemed to stir something in Emma's chest, a pang of unfamiliar sorrow she couldn't explain. Eleanor's words had struck a chord, but she couldn't understand why. She had never heard her mother speak of such a thing, and yet the old woman's grief seemed all too real. Eleanor's gaze remained locked on Emma, her face pale as she searched for any sign that this was more than a coincidence. "Please, tell me more." The tension in the air was thick, like a storm that had just begun to gather force. Emma stood motionless, her fingers still wrapped around the emerald necklace, as Eleanor's piercing gaze bore into her. There was something unnerving about the woman's intensity. It was as if the world around them had paused, and only the two of them existed in that moment. Emma had never been one to entertain fantasies or wild ideas, but the connection she felt to Eleanor and the way the old woman was reacting to her mother's necklace made her stomach twist with unease. "I'm sorry," Emma said, breaking the silence, "but I don't understand what you mean. My mother's necklace. It has nothing to do with you." Eleanor, however, was unmoved by Emma's confusion. She leaned forward, her eyes filled with desperation. "I don't believe that," she said softly, almost pleading. "That necklace. It was a gift to my daughter, and I'm certain she never parted with it. She disappeared shortly after. The necklace was supposed to be a symbol of our bond, a promise between us that no matter where she went, she would always remember me." Emma felt a knot form in her throat. She hadn't prepared for this emotional outburst from a stranger. She had simply been a waitress, serving coffee, trying to get through another busy shift. And yet here she was, caught in a conversation with a woman whose grief seemed too familiar, too real to ignore. "I don't know what to say," Emma muttered, her voice shaking slightly. "My mother, she died in an accident when I was just a child. There's no way she could have." She was cut off by Eleanor's urgent interruption. "She didn't die." Eleanor's voice trembled with raw emotion. She was forced to leave, for her own safety. And she took the necklace with her. The words hung in the air, heavy and charged with meaning. Emma's heart raced. Could Eleanor be right? Could her mother have faked her death? It seemed impossible, but the raw sincerity in Eleanor's voice left her with more questions than answers. She thought back to the vague memories she had of her mother, the late-night phone calls, the quiet conversations her mother had with a man she'd never met. There had always been a sense of mystery surrounding her mother's past, but Emma had never thought to question it until now. "Why would she leave me?" Emma whispered, her mind spinning. Eleanor's face softened, her eyes filled with empathy. "Because she loved you," she said, her voice barely audible. "She left to protect you, to keep you safe from the dangers that threatened our family. And now, I fear the same dangers are closing in again." Emma shook her head in disbelief. "I don't understand. My mother never spoke about anything like that. She never told me anything about about this." "She couldn't," Eleanor replied, her voice tinged with regret. "For her own safety, she had to vanish. She couldn't tell you what was happening, and she couldn't let you in on the truth. But now it's time for the truth to come out." Eleanor paused, her gaze dropping to the table between them. "I need to know if what I'm thinking is true. If your mother was really my daughter, then there are things I need to uncover, things that have been buried for too long." Emma's mind raced. The woman before her, a stranger just moments ago, now seemed like the key to unlocking a mystery she hadn't known existed. Eleanor Blackwood, a powerful billionaire who had lost her daughter decades ago, was now staring at her, like she was the missing piece of a puzzle. She wasn't sure if she was ready for the truth, but a part of her knew it was time to find out. "What do you want from me?" Emma asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Eleanor's gaze met hers, and for a brief moment, Emma saw something vulnerable behind the powerful woman's eyes. "I need you to trust me," Eleanor said. "I need you to help me find the truth, and I need you to promise that you'll keep an open mind." Emma nodded slowly, her fingers still brushing the necklace as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Her world had just turned upside down, and she wasn't sure where the next turn would take her. "I'll help," she said softly, "but I don't know what I'm walking into." Eleanor's eyes softened with a hint of relief. Neither do I, but together we'll uncover what's been hidden for far too long. The following days passed in a blur for Emma. What had started as a simple encounter in the cafe had quickly spiraled into something much larger than she had ever imagined. Eleanor Blackwood, the woman who had once seemed like an untouchable figure of wealth and power, had become a crucial part of her life. She had trusted Emma with a truth she couldn't yet fully comprehend, and Emma, despite her confusion and fear, couldn't shake the feeling that the answers to her mother's mysterious past lay somewhere within Eleanor's reach. It had been nearly a week since their conversation, and Emma had barely been able to focus on her work at the cafe. The once comforting routine had been replaced with the constant nagging thought that she was about to uncover something life-changing. Eleanor had hired a private investigator to look into Emma's background, to trace the threads of her mother's life, and to find any connection to the Blackwood family that had been hidden for so long. Emma had no idea what they might discover, but the idea that her mother might have faked her death to protect her from some unknown danger filled her with unease. She had tried to talk to her father about it, but the conversation had quickly turned uncomfortable. He was distant, unwilling to entertain the idea that there might be more to her mother's death than what he had always told her. "It's not worth digging up the past, Emma," he had said curtly, dismissing her concerns. "Let sleeping dogs lie." But Emma couldn't let it go. She had a burning desire to know the truth, even if it meant uncovering secrets that might tear her world apart. And then, just when she thought the silence was growing unbearable, Eleanor reached out again. This time, her message was short and to the point. "Meet me at the estate. We need to talk." The day Emma walked into the Blackwood estate, she felt like an outsider. The estate was a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by manicured lawns and towering gates. It was a place that seemed to belong to a world Emma had never known, a world of luxury, secrets, and power. She was escorted through the grand hallways, her heart pounding with each step as her mind raced with questions. Was her mother really a part of this world? Was Eleanor Blackwood, with all her wealth and influence, her grandmother? Eleanor was waiting for her in a large sitting room, a cozy yet opulent space filled with antique furniture and portraits of stern-looking ancestors hanging on the walls. There was a fire crackling softly in the hearth, casting a warm glow on Eleanor's tired face. As Emma stepped into the room, Eleanor rose from her chair, her eyes red-rimmed from a night of sleeplessness. "You're here," Eleanor said quietly, her voice betraying a hint of relief. "I've had the investigator dig through every document, every record I could get my hands on, and I believe I've found something." Emma's breath hitched in her throat. She had no idea what this meant, what Eleanor had found, but she knew it couldn't be good. Eleanor motioned for Emma to sit across from her, her fingers twitching nervously as she clutched a stack of papers. "I can't say for certain yet," Eleanor began, "but I have a theory. The investigator found a series of medical records under your mother's maiden name. They were sealed, hidden away, but they show something I didn't expect. Your mother wasn't just my daughter, she was involved in something much darker, something that had to do with the family's fortune." Emma's stomach churned as Eleanor continued. "There's a connection to Richard, to my son." Eleanor's voice faltered, her eyes filling with anger and sorrow. "He may have been the one who forced her to leave. I think she was." Running from him, Emma felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her. Richard, Eleanor's son, had always seemed distant and cold, but she hadn't expected him to be the cause of her mother's disappearance. She had met him a few times, always at family gatherings where he barely acknowledged her presence. He seemed more like a man who hid behind his wealth than someone with real power. But now, Emma saw him in a new light. "What do you mean?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. How could Richard be involved? Eleanor hesitated before speaking, her voice laced with regret. He was desperate for control, desperate for the family's fortune. "I believe he manipulated your mother into running. He knew that she was a threat to his inheritance, and he wanted to eliminate any possibility of her coming back." Emma's heart pounded as she listened. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. How could a son do this to his own mother? How could he betray his family so completely? But the more Eleanor spoke, the more Emma began to piece together the fragments of her mother's mysterious past. "There's more," Eleanor continued, her tone hardening. "I've already confronted Richard, but he denies everything. He's always been a master of deception. But I'm not giving up. We need to find out the truth." Emma sat in stunned silence, unable to process the flood of information. But one thing was clear. Her mother's disappearance was no accident, and it seemed as though Richard was at the heart of it all. The investigation had unearthed far more than Emma had bargained for, and as she sat across from Eleanor Blackwood in the grand sitting room, she couldn't shake the feeling that her entire world had been turned upside down. Eleanor's revelation about her son Richard, the man Emma had always seen as distant and cold being involved in her mother's disappearance, had shattered any remaining illusion she had about her family. The woman who had hired the investigator, the woman who had seemed so poised and powerful, was now just as broken as Emma herself. The truth, as they both discovered, was far darker and more complex than they had ever anticipated. Eleanor had been right about one thing. Richard had a deep connection to the family's wealth and influence. But there was more to the story than Emma could have ever imagined. Eleanor, still grasping the stack of papers, looked at Emma with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "Emma, your mother didn't just leave to protect you. She was forced to disappear. Richard, my son, orchestrated it all." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected something sinister, but the thought of Richard being the mastermind behind her mother's disappearance was almost too much to bear. "What do you mean?" Emma asked, her voice trembling as the weight of the revelation pressed down on her. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, clearly struggling with the enormity of the truth. "I've spent decades believing that your mother had simply run away, that she had abandoned us without a word. But the documents I uncovered tell a different story. They showed that she wasn't just running from danger, she was escaping from Richard's manipulation. He didn't want to share the inheritance with her. He thought if he removed her from the picture, he would be the sole heir to everything." Emma sat in stunned silence, her mind spinning. Richard, her mother's brother-in-law, had been behind her mother's disappearance. But why had Emma never known any of this? "I don't understand," Emma whispered, still processing the gravity of the situation. "If Richard was behind it, why didn't my mother come back for me? Why didn't she tell me the truth?" Eleanor's eyes softened her expression, filled with empathy and regret. "She couldn't, Emma. The danger was too great. She made the hardest decision a mother could make. She faked her death so that you would be safe. Richard had people watching her, making sure she stayed hidden. If she had contacted you, he would have found out. And then, not only would she have been at risk, but you would have been as well." Emma's heart broke as the full scope of her mother's sacrifice hit her. The woman she had once mourned as dead had actually been alive this whole time, living in fear, forced to stay away from her daughter for her own protection. The pain of losing her mother paled in comparison to the horror of what Eleanor was revealing. So, my mother. She wasn't just protecting me from Richard, she was protecting me from everything, Emma murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor nodded gravely. Yes, she made a choice that no mother should ever have to make. And now, I fear that the same danger is creeping back into our lives. Richard has grown more powerful over the years, and he'll stop at nothing to keep the family fortune for himself. Emma swallowed hard, trying to process the flood of emotions rushing through her. For the first time, she felt like she truly understood her mother's choices and her mother's love. She had given everything for Emma's safety, even if it meant living a life of fear and isolation. What now? Emma asked, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Eleanor leaned forward, her face set in a determined expression. Now we confront Richard. We have to expose him for what he's done. But this won't be easy. Richard will do anything to protect his secrets. He's a master of manipulation, and he'll stop at nothing to maintain control. We can't let him win, Emma. This is bigger than just us. Emma nodded slowly, the resolve building inside her. For the first time, she wasn't just a victim of her circumstances, she was part of something much larger. The truth about her mother's disappearance had finally come to light, and now it was time to make things right. She wasn't going to let Richard's lies and manipulations destroy her family any longer. I'm ready, Emma said, her voice firm. Let's do this. The days leading up to Emma's confrontation with Richard were filled with a quiet sense of determination. She had spent so long searching for answers, grappling with her mother's mysterious past, and now, finally, the truth was within reach. The fear of what Richard might do to keep his secrets hidden hung over her like a shadow, but she knew she couldn't back down. Eleanor had shared everything she knew, and together they had built a case proof that Richard was responsible for her mother's disappearance. But the hardest part was yet to come. The Blackwood estate, grand and imposing, seemed to pulse with a weighty tension as Emma stood beside Eleanor, both of them ready to face the man who had caused them so much pain. Richard had always been a figure in the background of Emma's life, distant, cold, and unapproachable, but now she saw him in a new light. He wasn't just the aloof family member. He was the mastermind of a plot that had torn her family apart. Richard's office, a vast, luxurious space at the heart of the estate, was where the final showdown would take place. As Emma and Eleanor entered, Richard was already seated behind his massive mahogany desk, his expression as unreadable as ever. His eyes flicked toward them, a faint smirk playing at the corners of his lips. "What is this?" he asked, his tone condescending. "You two have been conspiring behind my back, haven't you?" Eleanor's face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line as she met her son's gaze. "This isn't just about you anymore, Richard," she said, her voice steady. "It's about the truth that you've been hiding for decades." Richard's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his tone dismissive, but the tension in the room was palpable. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," Eleanor snapped, her composure slipping for the first time. "You orchestrated your sister's disappearance. You manipulated her into running, into abandoning everything, just so you could take the family fortune for yourself." Emma stood at the side, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched Richard's face contort with fury. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, his lips curled into a twisted smile, one that sent a shiver down Emma's spine. "You've got it all wrong, Mother," Richard said coldly. "I didn't orchestrate anything. Your precious daughter left because she wanted to. She didn't care about any of you. She was weak, and she made a choice. The only thing I did was ensure that the family legacy stayed intact." Eleanor took a step forward, her eyes blazing with anger. "You don't get to spin this any longer, Richard. I've seen the records. I've spoken to the investigator. Your actions were deliberate. You destroyed my family. And now it's time for you to face the consequences." Richard's smirk faltered as he realized that Eleanor had uncovered the truth. His expression hardened, and for a brief moment, Emma saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced by something darker, cold, calculating look that sent a chill through her. "You think you can just expose me like this?" Richard's voice was low, dangerous. "You have no idea what you're up against, Mother. Or you, Emma. You're both nothing but pawns in this game. You think you've uncovered the truth. You have no idea how deep this goes. If you speak out, everything you've worked for will be destroyed. I'll make sure of it." Emma felt a surge of anger, but Eleanor held up a hand, signaling her to stay quiet. "You've already done enough damage, Richard," Eleanor said, her voice calm but resolute. "You've manipulated and destroyed everything we've worked for, but no more. The truth is out, and it's time for you to answer for your actions." Richard's face twisted with rage, and for a moment Emma thought he might lunge at them. But instead, he sat back in his chair, his hands clenched into fists. "You think you can ruin me? I'll make sure you regret this. Both of you," he spat, his voice venomous. But Eleanor wasn't intimidated. She stepped forward, her voice strong and unwavering. "You're the one who will regret this, Richard. We're taking this to the public. I'll make sure everyone knows what you've done, and I'll make sure you lose everything." Richard's face paled as he realized the severity of the situation. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. "You're making a mistake," he hissed, but Eleanor stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. Emma, her heart still racing from the confrontation, stepped forward as well. "You took my mother from me," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You took everything from her, from me, and you will pay for it." For the first time in a long while, Emma felt a sense of closure. Richard may have tried to destroy her mother's legacy, but she was finally taking control of her own life. Eleanor had chosen to stand by her, and together they would expose Richard for the monster he was. As Richard stormed out of the room, his face contorted with rage, Emma turned to Eleanor. The battle was far from over, but this was the beginning of a new chapter. The truth was out, and Emma knew that she had one. The family's secrets were no longer safe in the dark. Eleanor turned to Emma, her face softening with a look of pride. "You're stronger than you think, Emma," she said quietly. "I'm so proud of you." Emma smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, she felt like she was walking it with her head held high. Together, they would rebuild, and no one not Richard could take that away from them.